For Dejusticia, the Tang Prize was a surprise because it was totally unexpected, as it comes from very far away, from a tradition that is not so familiar to us. And when we found out that the Tang dynasty represents a golden age of civil and academic government based on merits in Chinese history, we felt very humbled, but also very tuned because they represent flexibility, openness, tolerance, meritocracy, and knowledge-based decisions. And they're all part of the values that our organization embraces. This feeling of surprise and value sharing turned into a great honor when we saw also who were the previous recipients of the prize, jurists and scholars that we deeply admire. Albie Sachs, Louis Arbour, Joseph Raz. The three represent a perspective of the rule of law that transcends formalisms and concentrates in material justice and equality. Finally, today more than ever, we feel deeply committed to continue fulfilling our mission. We received this nomination as a recognition to the accomplishments of the Constitution of Colombia that guide our fight for real justice. May I take this moment to thank the Tang Prize Committee and the Tang Prize Funder for their generosity to laureate this collective team, but also a moment to thank each and every member of the Dejusticia community that carries in our blood the combination of academy and activism defending the rule of law, construed in our Constitution as a tool to transform reality, to change the status quo filled with lack of opportunities, lack of participation, and lack of equality, and to try to attain social justice.
The prestigious Tang Prize is not only an honor for Dejusticia, it also strengthens our work, as it confirms the validity of the basis on which Dejusticia was founded 15 years ago. The Tang Prize recognizes individuals and institutions who have made significant contribution to the rule of law through advances in legal theory and practice. Dejusticia was created precisely to establish bridges between legal academic research and social activism for human rights. We understand that academy and social activism are different fields with specific logics. But we believe that the rigid separation between these two worlds undermines democracy and weakens the protection of human rights. Thus, we have tried in all these years to advance the rule of law and the protection of the rights of the most marginalized groups in society through legal and socio-legal research, strategic litigation, public proposal for public policies, participation in public debates, and informal education for social leaders. We understand this prize as a recognition to these collective efforts and to these ideals, and that reinforces our commitment to them. Finally, the fact that this prize comes from a foundation based in Taiwan, Republic of China, is an additional motive of pride and satisfaction. Taiwan and Colombia are very different countries. In spite of that, they share some common challenges. We are both trying to overcome a legacy of authoritarianism and strengthen democracy and the rule of law in a very difficult context. We understand this prize also as a recognition of these shared ideals and challenges of our countries.
COVID-19 has contributed to pull the curtain and make the world conscious of massive economic inequality and lack of opportunities, including healthcare and livelihoods, which force us to revisit the rule of law as a tool to confront this pandemic. First, because the rule of law is the institution on which lies the safeguard of the rights to health, shelter, work, especially for minorities and for vulnerable populations, but also because the well-understood rule of law helps to find a balance between liberties and authority. Internationally, it has shown how the world is interconnected and what happens to one state affects its neighbors, close and far, and this reflects in terms of access to food, medicine, and work. Nationally, it is more important than ever to have a balance between the rights of the citizens and the authority, especially in a country like Colombia that has suffered an internal armed conflict for more than 50 years, and even the state has violated deeply human rights in the name of security and in the name of authority. In times of exceptions such as this pandemic, civil society has to be more vigilant than ever. Finally, in this type of crisis, the most difficult part is always for the most vulnerable, because they cannot be isolated without producing, they cannot have access to water, they have no savings and no means to resist. Even more in Colombia and South America, with very high levels of poverty and the highest numbers of inequality. The executive must balance the access to these rights, and the legislative and the judiciary must honor the system of checks and balances, looking for distributive justice. And in this, our role of a civil society is to continue placing academy and activism at the service of the rule of law, so that all its members are included effectively and equitably.
The pandemic of COVID-19 implies two different difficult challenges for the Justicia. The first is a practical one. We need to adapt our daily activities, which are significantly based on work in the field, to the requirements of social distancing that makes much more difficult this kind of work. The second one is a more theoretical and political one. Governments have assumed emergency powers which must be justified to face the health threats posed by the pandemic. However, emergency powers are always risky for the rule of law, as they implicate severe restrictions on human rights and extreme concentration of power on the executive branch. Besides, COVID-19 might increase poverty and inequality. In a sense, we are living a triple emergency: a health emergency because of the pandemic, a legal emergency because of the emergency powers assumed by governments, a social emergency because of the impacts of the pandemic and the measures taken to combat it. In that context, organizations such as the Dejusticia face huge challenges. How to protect the rule of law and human rights in this triple emergency? How to avoid that some emergency measures that are necessary to combat the pandemic do not lead to increased authoritarianism and inequality? How to transform the pandemic from a threat to human rights into an opportunity to build stronger democracy based on the rule of law and an increased solidarity among individuals, groups, and countries?